Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Laura Ann Singh, and it's a stupid last name because I'm a singer, but I decided to take my husband's last name because I liked it when we got married. And so I've been a professional vocalist for about 20 years, a little over that. I started singing professionally right when I graduated from college. And it was a long and circuitous path to figure out how to do that. So I've had a lot of odd jobs and things like that as well. But yeah, that's what I do. I'm a vocalist. I sing with a lot of different projects. I sing on my own. I get hired for other people's projects that they're doing too. So it's always, I teach lessons. It's kind of always, most musicians are a little bit of a hodgepodge trying to just fill out their income, and make certain things are going to be more steady than others. So it's a lot of juggling and figuring out where your real passion is to, like what you enjoy the most and what can make money. So
What would you say you enjoy the most out of everything you do? Because I know you do basically everything.
I really enjoy performing. I think that's my favorite thing. And I really enjoy performing when I've had time, of course, to really get comfortable with the material, and it feels more like a conversation, and I can be relaxed and just really enjoy the whole process, because it's very much a way of, in our culture we talk a lot about mindfulness and being in the moment, and for me that's a way that I can be really, really present, because you really have to be focused on what's directly in front of you and not think about anything else. So for me it always feels like a big release. Even when I'm kind of dreading going out to a gig or getting to work or whatever, if I can get to that place, I feel great after I leave. It's like a big release for me.
So I was reading a little bit about you on your website, and it said that you have experience performing in super big, fancy concert halls and venues, and then also just intimate, smaller gigs and performances. So I was wondering where you stood with that, because I know that you can feel at home kind of anywhere you're performing because you have that engagement with your audience. So what would you say regarding that subject, on where you feel most at home, where you feel like you have the most fluid communication and engagement with your audience?
I still really love smaller venues. When you get to play in a big place with lots of people, it's exciting, and it's a totally different energy. And I feel like I have a lot of dread leading up to that, but when I get there, I can really enjoy it. But smaller stuff a lot of times is just more, that engagement feels more immediate. There's less of I've never felt like a great performer, in that I kind of just do what I do, and I hope that you can engage with it. And I want you to, and I'm not trying to ignore you, but I'm also not gonna dazzle you, or I'm kind of basic. So I think I can really enjoy both ends of that spectrum and everything in between. But if I had to pick, I would say I love smaller venues where it's a little more intimate.
And what's your favorite music you like to perform? The genre of music that you like to perform?
That's so hard. I really Brazilian music for me just has this deep part of my heart that I never get tired of it. I never feel like, oh my God, here we go again. I've probably sung the Golf Ipanema 65,000 times, and I'm still yeah, let's do it, So Brazilian music for me, but I have really deep, I have a lot of roots in American songbook stuff, vocal standards. I love those songs. I love old country music. There's just a lot of different things, but if I had to pick again, I think I would say Brazilian music is my favorite.
And if I'm correct, you're not Brazilian yourself.
No.
So how would you say that has challenged you, or any drawbacks you've experienced with your identity intersecting with the Brazilian music that you love and perform and, consider yourself a big part of?
Of course. Well, there's two really important sides to this, I think, and one is appropriation, and the other is conversation, right? So I would never want to appropriate music that's not my own. And for me, that would mean using it in a way that's gimmicky or to my financial advantage. When it's been anything but that. I mean, being very niche has been great sometimes, but it can be a little bit of a pigeonhole. Singing in a language that's not widely understood can be difficult because it's a layer of connection that you have to kind of jump over to get people to connect with the music. So appropriation, I don't feel like that's a problem here because it's not like there's tons of Brazilian singers here that I'm taking work from either, I felt like it was this conversation, and the older I've gotten, I feel like between me and what I have experienced, and then experiencing this incredible love for this music and diving into it. And then understanding that authenticity is not my goal. That I can only be authentic to myself. And so the whether or not I'm like Brazilian enough isn't really the question anymore. I think I used to have a lot of insecurity about that, like, oh, I didn't grow up with this stuff, it's not like innate in me, it's not like, and so now I feel like it's been a beautiful thing to be able to share this music with people who maybe don't, who like it, but don't have like the same passion that I do to go explore it extensively. So I can just like give them what I've cultivated from it, and they can appreciate it. And I love that role, to like bring that music into people's lives that wouldn't necessarily have access to it here. And when I go to Brazil, I love that I don't sound Brazilian, I don't sound, and they're like, whoa, it's so cool to play with someone who doesn't sound Brazilian and that's got a really different, like, you're coming from a really different place. And I feel like most gringa when I'm there, and it's always this moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm like, what am I doing? But then it turns into this beautiful interplay where everybody trusts each other and trust the respect that we're bringing to the music. And so it's, but I will say that the question of authenticity and intersecting with identity, and am I allowed to sing this music, and am I good enough to sing this music, and that I struggle with that a lot, and I think I've come to a place of a lot of peace about it, and like how I deal with it, how I approach it. So it's a great question, and one you could probably talk about for years.
I think authenticity is something I struggle with as well. I think just having two cultures, being Korean first and then American second, that's something I've always battled with. And with K-pop on the rise too, like it's really interesting seeing people not appropriating Korean culture, but being a part of it in a different way that is not native to them. So that's something that I've also seen like in the US, and I haven't really traveled out of the country, but I know that you have performed a lot outside of the US. So what would you say, sets apart performing in the US, like apart from the other countries that you've performed in?
The US, it's an interesting thing because the US is so, like, appropriation is so wrapped up in capitalism for me. And the US has exported its culture for decades. And so this question of appropriation is, like, there's always been a conversation between cultures, right? There's always been cultures rubbing up against each other and rubbing off on each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's beautiful, and it's what's made some of the greatest art forms in the world. That's, that we still celebrate today, is different people coming into contact with each other and getting inspired or absorbing something that they didn't do before. So I think it's really important to have that like baseline, but it's also important to be sensitive. If somebody feels like it's appropriation, then it might be. Like if you're, if a Brazilian came up to me and said, I don't feel like you should be doing this, I will say I've had only the opposite response. Singing in Brazil, singing here, when Brazilians talk to me, they're just like grateful that someone cares about their music. And of course people care about the music, but to see someone from a different culture say like, this is so beautiful, I want to know everything I can about it. And a lot of that comes from that point of respect, as in like, I'm not trying to be Brazilian, I'm trying to be me singing Brazilian music. And I have incredible respect for Brazilian musicians, and the story and the history of Brazilian music is deep and just bottomless, So I think your posture matters a lot too. But going back to American audiences versus audiences abroad, by and large, audiences abroad are very much more receptive. And like when you play New York, the cultural pressure is to be engaged and interested. And so even when it's a little performative, people are like, yeah, cool, And like the weirder and more avant-garde or just like off the beaten path your music is, like it's almost like more cultural pressure for that. So it's really cool. In that you have appreciative audiences, people stretching themselves, people listening to stuff going to see a show of stuff they might not know anything about. Or people coming to see a show and they know so much about it because they love this tiny niche music, And that's celebrated, and like I said, like there's actual cultural pressure there for that. Other places in the US, not so much. So I feel like when you make a sincere connection with an audience, especially doing music that's not English, here, it's very, very like, it feels significant. Abroad, in France and Russia and Brazil, like people love to go hear music, and they expect to be moved, they expect to be engaged. It's a really different, it's a cultural difference. Americans are distracted, they're bored, they're interested in themselves. They don't have attention span for engaging in something larger that might require a little more attention. And I don't mean to say that, and it could be also because I understand Americans. And maybe I'm missing things in other places that I'm like just assuming is interest. but I will say that like I find that doing the music I do, which has been again like a little off the beaten path, kind of has demanded yeah, there's dogs here. Has kind of demanded that that the people that do come and do engage care. And so I feel like I've had great audiences and receptive audiences here too. So I don't mean to be it's not a great session, not complaining, not insulting, but yeah.
As you know, I'm in the Brazilian ensemble right now with Professor Harding, and freshman year I took guitar lessons with Professor Harding, and he would share stories of how, first of all, just we did a little bit of Brazilian music, and he would share the meaning of the lyrics and the emotion that's behind the music theory of Brazilian music. And he would share stories about how, similar to you, like when he performs here in New York and stuff, like stage presence is such a big thing, captivating the audience with whatever you have. Whereas in Brazil, he said he'd be performing and people from the audience would come up on stage and sing and dance with him. And just that connection of, I think here the whole concert and live music is very capitalistic. It's based on money, whereas I don't know about anywhere else, but and specifically in Brazil, it's about connecting with the audience, being at home, in whether it is your native country or not, and then connecting with the audience at a level where they feel like they can share the stage with you.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting perception.
I think that it's rare to find music that's really alive, as in like music that's being played places in the United States that is not for money or just like Brazil still has a huge folk tradition where people will go down to their bodega down the street, the botiquín, and just sit and play samba for hours. And it's like a weekly meetup, and it happens every time. Or they'll have a choro group, and they'll go hear choro every Sunday at this place in São Paulo or São João del Rei, like the biggest cities to the tiniest cities. You still have these traditions that are really rooted, and so people feel a part of it. Whereas here, it feels like it's getting more and more of that separation, and honestly, that might be part of the reason I don't like that the bigger stage, it feels so formal, it feels so, and to me, all this music is about life and about the shared experience of like joy and tragedy and sorrow and happiness all being mixed up together, and how do we all deal with that, and where's the pressure valve for that stuff. And so I feel the pressure valve when I get to sing, but if you're not entering into it, I don't know how you experience it, you know. And so I think that it has to do with having a real live, living musical tradition that is like an undercurrent in your culture too. So that, yeah, I totally agree with him.
I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this,
No?
but he was saying how American music to him is very shallow and surface level. It's about drugs and heartbreak and love, whereas Brazilian music, there's a story. And I'm not, he didn't say it as a way of American music that lacks a story, but he was saying how Brazilian music, deeper in the core, like has a tradition, some story that's shared within villages, or like a deeper sense of emotion that isn't just sadness or depression. It's, sorrow and joy and vulnerability.
Yeah. And
And that's all said not only just in the lyrics, but the expression, the hand movements, and the chords. Like even just not just the regular triads and the chord progressions that everyone knows in pop music. It's the seventh chords, the suspense chords, the add 9, add 13, all of that stuff we studied together. And I think that's interesting because obviously all I really know is American music, and even when I write songs, that's how I compose my songs, is using the chord progressions that everyone knows, because it's easy that way and it sounds good.
Yeah.
But I think there's a difference between it just sounding good and pleasant to the ear versus it really touching someone's heart.
I completely agree, and I think that like the Brazilian music has this undercurrent, especially lyrically, but I think it's really mirrored in the music. It's what you're talking about. There's this longing, this intangible kind of feeling of that joy and sadness being mixed up. And there's a Brazilian expression that's rir para não chorar, which means you laugh so you don't cry. And so in all of this song, like samba is so crazy because you'll have a song. A friend sent me a text yesterday, like, what is this song saying? And it's an Elis Regina song written by, I think it might be João Bosco, but I might be wrong. It might be César Camargo. And it's like da 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 da. That's real fast, and it's like paz, me deixe em paz, da 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 da. It's real happy, like alegre, like big, like fast. Sounds super major tone. Like your ear would be like, that's a happy song. And the whole thing is like, leave me alone. This is terrible. It doesn't work anymore. This relationship is over, and we can't keep going on.
Wow.
And so you find that all the time, like these lyrics that don't match what we would imagine would match in American music. It's almost always like very obvious. Like if it's a sad song, it starts with a minor chord, and if it's a happy song, it's going to be faster and all major. And you don't have that there. You have a lot more mixing of these sentiments, which is how we actually live, right? That's how we feel day to day. Like I had this good news, and now I have this bad news, but I have this good news, I still feel bad, and certain things are great. So it's all mixed up. It's not as clear cut, and I think that's part of what makes it very appealing.
My writing brain just keeps associating everything you're saying with like juxtaposition.
Yes.
Essentially, that's kind of what it is.
Absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely.
But that's definitely an interesting way to look at things, and that's a unique perspective to have, like as a non-Brazilian yourself, but someone that wants to share the culture, not out of appropriation, but out of authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. It is this juxtaposition of like, and a lot of that joy comes from this feeling of community, shared history, that this is what we do. We play samba when we're sad, we play it when we're happy, we celebrate, we mourn. This is it's our pressure valve, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good, like metaphor for it, you know?
So in Richmond, you and Professor Harding started a bossa nova group?
Yep.
And you started that when you were a student at Richmond, or after?
Right after.
Okay.
We a friend of, I don't need to be boring, but it's like a friend of mine asked me to sing Shegeji Saldaji on his senior recital, and I was singing standards and stuff like that already, so that was fine. But then he asked me to sing this, and around the same time, one of my best friends, who was also a student of Kevin's, his parents were transferred to Sao Paulo. His dad was Colombian. So he spent his summers in Brazil and would go to record stores and found the first 3 records of João Gilberto compiled, and gave 1 copy to me and 1 copy to Kevin. And then we both independently went crazy. and then kind of realized that we were having this, this love affair with this music, and then decided to start putting some songs together. And he took over the jazz band when Mike Davison was on sabbatical 1 year while I was there. So I had sung with him in a context of a jazz combo. So we decided to start putting some of these songs together. And when we first started, we had to do over half of our repertoire, just like, standards, like jazz standards. So funny to me to think about playing that stuff with Kevin. We haven't played in years. But we didn't have enough material. We were like hammering it out by ourselves, listening to records, like no charts. There was no real book for this stuff. We didn't have any real resources except this record. So anyway, it was a really amazing thing that happened, actually.
You talked about a love affair with the music. I thought that was a very interesting way to describe it. Could you maybe elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so it was absolutely a love affair because it took up this giant space in my mind and heart. Like any free time I had, I just wanted to get and start looking at songs and trying to translate them, and I wanted to be as engaged as possible. I wanted to go to every Brazilian party that I ever heard of. I wanted to get to Brazil. I wanted to listen to this exclusively. So it was like taking up this huge part of my life, like when you fall in love, this passion, every spare minute should be with this, That's how I felt, for sure.
That's true passion. I don't know how else you would describe passion without using the word passion.
Yeah.
But that seems, it's like your heart and soul, you're giving it up for the music.
Yeah.
And you're letting it kind of become you.
Yeah. And I got obsessed with it. I wanted to be really, I wanted to learn the language. I wanted to understand the poetry rather than just sing phonetically. And so I got really obsessed with pronunciation, and I found it to be a really beautiful language to sing in. I love the vowels. I love how it lays. I love how rhythmic it can be. That was another piece of that too. But yeah.
I haven't seen you perform too much, but I will say the times I have seen you perform, you feel the music and your body feels the music.
Yeah.
Like your body dances with the music. So I think that definitely speaks to all the passion you have.
Yeah. And also, that's how I make sure I don't get lost.
Well, you're in touch with your body when you're singing.
Well, that's an interesting thing. The word incorporate actually means to put in your body. Corporal is body.
Yeah.
Incorporate is it becomes a part of you. And so when you think about incorporating rhythm, I think about where do you feel it? How do you keep these pulses and understand the music on a level that's not here? It's deeper, So.
Is that the only music group that was based in Richmond? Because I know you have other Latin American groups too, and I mean you're very well rounded. You have a lot going on.
So the other project that I got involved in after the Brazilian thing was one of my best friend is a piano player, and she plays piano for by remote. She's one of their composers, arrangers. She's a powerhouse, and she and her husband, who's the lead singer for By Remote, had wanted to start a project of boleros, like the more romantic music. They never got to play because the salsa dancers are relentless and they just want to dance and dance. And if you play a slow song, they're like, woo! So a lot of that music, it was originally done in duo or trio singing. So, and it's often a man and a woman with a duo style. So Marlise also loves Brazilian music. She grew up listening to it, playing it, and she figuring it out. You know, so we had that shared thing, and so she played a couple of times with Quattro na Bossa, and then ended up asking if I would be willing to like learn a couple of songs and try it out. And so then this new project, Miramar, was born, and we did a lot of covers. That's how I got really interested in female composers too. Our whole first record was basically around this female Puerto Rican composer. So that's an interesting situation because Ray's Puerto Rican, and he's the one who invited me to sing these songs. He writes all the Spanish language material because we do a lot of original material now. And so again, I don't feel like that's appropriation because I was invited, but I don't speak Spanish very well. I can get around, but it's not like, there's nothing close to fluency. And, but I'm not singing phonetically. Like I understand enough to know, like to have, and I would always go and understand a song before I would sing it. But yeah, so that's another thing. And honestly, again, here, a lot of times people that know this music or are familiar with it are so happy to have someone representing it that can appreciate it from outside. It doesn't have to just be us. It's like other people see the beauty in this too, and that's kind of what I hope to offer in those situations. But he's kind of my cover. I'm like, he's actually real, you know?
Well, with all of that being said, what would you say is your role as a musician, in the Richmond music scene specifically?
That's a great question, and it's one I think it's taken me 20 years to even begin to answer, because every musician I know has just deep imposter syndrome. Every single one, all the ones I love the most.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be. So people that don't, that's awesome that they've been able to overcome that. But I think it took me a long time to understand what my role might be, which is I think I'm a really good interpreter of music. I think I can take something that someone else has written and bring it alive to an audience. So that's kind of how I see myself artistically. And like beyond that, as I'm getting older, I think it's really important to like encourage, especially younger women, to do music, because there's just not many of us. And so whenever I see another woman, and that's another reason Marlise and I are such great friends, there's just not a lot of women doing this. And so, yeah, those are the two really big things, I think. I always want to support other local musicians because it's such a great town of talent. There's so many great musicians playing here, and I've been really grateful to be part of a lot of different things. I like that. Like I said, I think for a lot of years I was kind of pigeonholed because I'm really focused on this music, and so now I've had opportunity to do a few different things that have just been great to stretch me and grow me as a musician too. So,
building off of everything you just said, where do you see yourself making the greatest impact? I know that's a tough question. I really, and I don't say this to be like Hallmark, I think musicians can get obsessed with legacy, like who's gonna care when I die, or what am I gonna leave behind, or whatever. And I think that really that's another reason it all comes back to performance for me. Like some musicians love to record, and some musicians love to write, and some musicians, everybody has these different places where they feel really alive and connected to like their gift. And that's another reason I really like live performance, because when I feel connected to myself and the music, then I feel like I can pass on some levity. And I don't mean levity as in like stupid. I mean like we all need that pressure valve. We all need to release. We all need to feel relaxed and better.
And even if it's sad music, you know, sometimes there's a release there too. So that's really what I see the most impactful thing I can do is give people a brief lift in hopes that they just leave anything I'm doing feeling better. You know, that's kind of, I think that's like the best I could hope for. It seems like a small thing when I say it out loud, but I don't know that it really is. I think it's an important part of life.
I think everything you're saying, like, I can categorize as it being cathartic.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a word that is so underrated.
Yes.
It captures everything you're saying so well, I feel like.
Cathartic is a great word to describe how I feel after I finish singing. Mm-hmm. And I hope that like is transmitted, you know, that there's like this sense of like, that felt right. And like a recentering almost, you know.
Well, my last question for you is there anything I didn't ask that you think I should know?
No, it's an excellent questions, excellent thought. I will tell you though that you did a great job playing, and it's so cool that you're Korean and American. My husband grew up, he left India when he was 8 and came here, and so he's been here longer than he was ever in India, but he's always felt like that third culture push and pull. And then my daughter is interracial, and so she's also feeling like she's got Indian family and American family, and she's somewhere in the middle. And that's like the thing that makes America great. That is actually what makes America great. not anything else. And so like lean into those things as you get older. Like it's awesome to get curious about your home, your natal culture, but it's also like it's great to be yourself in the mix of who that is, you know. Like I think that's so important. I think that's what even people who are like as a white woman born in America, I still have had to figure out who I am in the context of all this, and the things that make you feel confused are probably the things that are really important about you too. So don't be afraid to be just totally yourself. In the context of being musical and writing and stuff like that, like, yeah, you know, your voice is important. So that's not a question, but that's just 2 cents.
Thank you so much. I think you brought a lot of interesting points to the table. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.